In today's world, people feel lost in a sea of ideas. Which ones should we accept? Stay tuned because you're listening to Veracity Hill, striving for truth on faith, politics, and society. Here is your host, Kurt Jarris.
Well, a good day to you, and thanks for joining us here on another episode of Veracity Hill, where we are striving for truth on faith, politics, and society. It's very nice to be with you here today, and today is a special day, not because of the hot topic that we have for you, but because I am doing the video live stream all on my own today. And so Chris is off for the weekend. We've got Joel subbing in on the soundboard, so thank you, Joel, for coming in.
No problem.
And let me ask you, Joel, you've got a newborn in the house.
That's right.
Little Freddie, how's he doing?
He's doing great. I think it's our second child, and it's a little
piece of cake.
Yeah. You already know what's going on. I mean,
yeah.
It's funny when your 3-year-old daughter wakes you up in the morning now, and you feel like a zombie, and she's
right.
just there, and you could practically have a sting of orchestral music because you're like, what? Oh.
Very nice. Good. Well, I'm very grateful that you are able to come in today and fill in for Chris on the soundboard. So thanks for that. All right. So we've got a few announcements before we get into today's program. Some of them are very welcomed news here. And so here we have the fundraiser that we've been doing. We have a very large update for you. This is a fundraiser that we've had for a couple months. And just this week, I was able to meet with some donors, and they gave a big sign of support for us, giving a large monthly amount. We are now 96% of the way to our goal. So our goal has been $800 per month in new support. And now we are just on the cusp of finishing. So we would love to get your support, finish this fundraiser, especially before the end of the year. Again, looking for monthly support. So if you can chip in $10 or $20 a month to help this program grow, that would be a great blessing. We also have in a voice message from our friend Mark Lester of the Checkmarked Film Reviews. And I want to play for you now a 90-second review here of Star Wars The Last Jedi from Mark Lester of Checkmarked Film Reviews.
Hi, this is Mark Lester from Checkmarked Movie Reviews. I just wanted to leave my 2 cents worth, as it were, for the new Star Wars movie, which seems to be very divided, especially between critics and audience members, because critics seem to like it a lot, and the audience members really don't, mainly the die-hard Star Wars fans. I am a Star Wars fan, but not one of the hardcore ones. Personally, I thought it was a great movie, and have some parts in it that were a little unnecessary. I won't spoil anything. But director and writer Rian Johnson definitely has shown us sides of the Force now that are things we have not seen before. And it is true, there are still some questions that aren't answered, and that's something else that a lot of the fans are probably complaining about. But, that's a good thing, I think, that some questions don't always have answered. It's up for interpretation, and it could be shown in the next movie. So I personally like the movie. On my website, I gave it a 4 out of 5. It is long. It is the longest of the Star Wars films at about 2.5 hours, but it is still definitely worth seeing. It's bittersweet also to see the late great Carrie Fisher as Princess Leia. So definitely worth checking out. Thank you. Again, this is Mark Lester from Checkmarked Film Reviews.
All right, so that was our friend Mark Lester, and he asked if he could come on the show, and I know he's called in live before, but I think given that in Chris's absence with all that I was doing, I figured, hey, just leave us a quick 90-second review, and we'll air that. So thank you, Mark. We appreciate your chiming in from time to time, and I hope that if you are interested to read about Mark's reviews, you can go to checkmarkedfilmreviews.com. Okay, so today's topic is a very hot one. We are talking about what is net neutrality. And joining us on the show today is Dr. Mark Jamison, and he is a visiting scholar at the American Enterprise Institute, where he works on how technology affects the economy and how telecommunications and Federal Communications Commission issues. So, Dr. Jamison, thank you so much for joining us on the show.
That's my pleasure, Kurt.
So tell me a little bit about your interest in technology and communications, and then we'll get a little bit into the FCC and the drama that's been unfolding this past week.
Okay, well, I've always been a technology junkie. I was one of the first people to try and own a PC, which dates me a lot older than you and perhaps a lot of people in your audience. Early on in my career, I was hired by the state of Kansas, where I lived, to regulate telecommunications companies. And so I was able to take that kind of technology junkie perspective and put it into my career. So I've been able to kind of follow that path. And these days, I'm very interested in how the tech companies perform, how new startups get started, how the information works, and then, of course, all of the issues of competition. I'm an economist by training, and I like to think about and study how markets work and where they have issues, and then how the government interfaces with all of that.
Yeah, great. And so then you're, in addition to the scholarship that you do for the American Enterprise Institute, you are also the director and Gunter Professor of the Public Utility Research Center at the University of Florida's Warrington College of Business.
Yes.
So now tell me, I'm not all that familiar with where the university, what city is that again in?
It's in Gainesville, Florida. It's a small town. If you know where Disney is, or Orlando, we're about an hour and a half north of there. Gotcha.
Okay, and those would be the Gators, is that right?
That is exactly right.
Okay, right, yeah. So I just was forgetting where that was. My wife is a Seminole. She graduated from Florida State, so I guess the bit of the rivalry there.
That does happen, although we both did very poorly in football this year.
I know, yeah. I had been following a little bit. Florida State was ranked high at the start, but not as good of a team as people had expected. So
yeah.
Good. Okay, so tell me a little bit. I know there, especially on social media, this is really a hot button issue. Before we get into, say, even the pros and cons of the repeal effort here of these regulations, take us back a few years ago, at the very least, and help us understand what was the atmosphere like. Why was there a perceived need to even bring about these regulations on Internet Service Providers, or ISPs?
Okay, so the motivations aren't incredibly clear, actually, but let me just back up a little bit. So what people talk about are two different things. They use the same words to describe those things. One is indeed a concept called net neutrality. Now, it obtained that name quite a few years after the principle was put into effect. If you go back to the people who originally designed the internet technologies, they ran into an issue, which was when you have congestion in the network, how does the information flow through? Who gets to go through first? Who has to go through second? What have you? Mm-hmm. And how can people connect to it? What they decided was since this was about internetworking, they wanted anything to be able to connect with it. They also said, well, for getting through those congested pieces, let's have it be first come, first served. And those two things together, several years later, quite a few years later, as a matter of fact, were labeled net neutrality in a law journal article. Mm. So that's what it is supposed to mean. Now, a few other things have gotten clodged onto that title over the years, but that's the basic idea, that people can kind of do whatever they want to connect to the network, and all traffic is essentially treated the same, that it's first come, first served.
Okay.
That all became quite political and quite different when we got to the year 2014. And the story that I understand from watching how things worked in the media and knowing a few of the people who were involved in it, essentially the Federal Communications Commission was confronted with the issue that how is it going to regulate the internet? It worked on a few different things over time, and the courts had told them, no, you can't do it that way. You don't really have legal authority for that. So they were going through that once again. And the Obama White House said, well, what we really want is for the internet to be treated like a telephone company. Let's regulate it as if it's a public utility. Before that time, the FCC had really not touched the internet. It had always been light-handed. That started with the Clinton administration and continued through the Bush administration, the second Bush administration, and then, of course, through most of the years of the Obama administration. But then when they got to this decision in 2014, suddenly the Obama administration, the White House said, no, let's treat this like a telephone company, and then we can just completely control it, completely regulate it. And that's what the FCC decided to do. That then came out as the decision in 2015, and that hasn't gone quite as well as some people might have liked for it to. So the new FCC has decided to reverse that decision and go back to the way things were before 2015.
So this is for some people on the internet, they're talking about, this is, internet companies are going to be able to charge whatever they might want. But it seems that even prior to 2015, that wasn't necessarily the case, where they didn't necessarily jack up prices for using, say, online gaming or just checking your email. It was still very much a lump sum monthly thing. So maybe first, right off the bat here, we'll just address this concern. While it seems logically possible the companies might do that, do you think that's what will actually happen? And even if they do jack up the prices, say, for video gamers or online streamers, is that necessarily a bad thing for all consumers?
Okay, so just to clarify, prior to 2015, no one regulated the prices that internet service providers charged consumers, retail customers. With that decision in 2015, the FCC still never regulated those prices. Those prices have never been regulated. There's nothing in this decision that the FCC just voted on Thursday that would change that. By classifying internet service as a telephone service, which is what they did back in 2015, the FCC said we have authority to, but they never actually did that, and very specifically said they were not going to. So nothing has changed with respect to the regulation of the prices that you were just talking about.
So tell me then, what exactly has changed? So, you explained that, well, now the internet won't be viewed as a public utility anymore, but what does that mean for us common folk? What sort of effects do you think will occur and will have had? So if the repeal hadn't gone through, what would we have expected to see with regard to internet service providers? Okay, so you might think about, did you notice anything different between 2014 and 2015? Or 2016, or into 2017, chances are you notice no change in your internet service from that. Yeah. And I think that will be the case in this situation as well, that most consumers will not notice anything being different, especially nothing different that they could attribute to what the FCC did. Now, what was happening, though, under the regulations is that it restricted the types of businesses that the internet service providers could offer, the services they could offer. But it was primarily services they would offer to what we call the edge providers, the Facebooks, the Amazons, the Googles, et cetera, all those people who are providing web services, including you. And they were just restricted. They couldn't offer you anything except connect. And if your traffic gets through well, good for you. If it doesn't get through well, life's tough. We can't do anything for you. Yeah. So the
So when the FCC in 2015 said, internet service providers, you can't offer those kinds of new services, and there was also an implied threat in the decision that internet service providers might have to what we call unbundle their networks, which is take pieces of it and sell it to their competitors. The internet service provider said, wow, my profit prospects just went down. And they cut back on the amount of the investment they were making. So the estimates are that for the 2-year period this decision was in effect, about $3.6 billion less investment was made than would have been otherwise. Now, you probably didn't notice any effect of that, but 5 years from now, 10 years from now, you would, because the internet would not perform as well. So it'd be hard to tell a consumer, well, things are just going to be really different for you. They are, but you won't be able to attribute it to this decision.
So, for those that have read Frederick Bastiat's The Law, I think he brings here a what he calls an economic fallacy, the fallacy of the broken window, I believe. That was his. Basically, what you're saying here is that as a result of this regulation, it would have prevented future growth to come sooner than it otherwise would have. Is that right?
I think that's fair. So one of the things that was very specifically prohibited in this 2015 decision was for internet services providers to offer what's called a fast lane. And so someone like yourself, if you find that your streaming over the internet is just you're finding some congestion, and you say, could you please put me when there's congestion, put me first in line. That would help you out. Now, if you're a competitor to Netflix or someone like that, that really helps you a lot, because Netflix and some of the other big content providers actually don't go over the public internet to a large extent. Now, that's a little complicated, and I can explain how that is. So all of us connect to the internet through a connection, but we're connecting to the internet. The internet, the public internet, actually starts somewhere further into the network. And that is where these rules apply. They apply out there in where the networks start connecting together. Your service is completely on that public internet. Netflix is not. Netflix bypasses it because they know that their videos will reach congestion and then their service quality will be poor. So they said, I'm not doing that. And they built some of their own network facilities to be able to get by it. So if you want to compete with them, you need to try and get that same kind of quality. How do you do it? Well, you can't build your own network. You're too small for that. But you could buy some put me first in line type services from an internet service provider. Yeah.
So I know since we're talking about these companies and some people, it's really fascinating. They see that they're worried against big business, but at the same time, they want these big businesses. Either it seems like there's cognitive dissonance going on, and so I have one friend. He's concerned with how to compete. He's in the music industry. And so he believes that by repealing net neutrality, it's going to be harder for people trying to get into the music industry to compete with streaming services like Pandora. What do you think will happen with the Obama era regulations being repealed? Will that make it harder for musicians trying to get a big break in the music field? Will the streaming services grow, or is there something to make it more fair, if you will, for the small time folks?
Yeah, well, there's a lot I don't know about the music business, so that there's things I probably couldn't answer very well.
Sure.
But essentially, what I suspect your friend is concerned about is something that's called zero rating. Now, that was never part of net neutrality. The FCC's decision in 2015 did not really talk about that. The restrictions on that came from part of the bureaucracy of the FCC. Some of the staff decided they didn't like that very much, and so they started trying to stop it. But zero rating can be a great benefit, again, to small startups. So you take the kind of large content providers where they are already well known. They have great services. They don't have to market them very much. People talk about them. If you want to compete with that, you need every advantage you can get. One of those might be you tell customers, for 30 days, I'll pay for your data. And not only that, I'll give you something else in addition. And then that gives you an opportunity to get a leg up that some of the larger content providers really don't need. So that opportunity to buy things that differentiate you are just great for the startup companies. The more opportunities you give a startup, the better off they're going to be.
So tell me, so what you're saying here is that as a result of the repeal of those regulations, you're saying it's going to be easier for small businesses or even people trying to make it into any industry really, but who are utilizing the internet to do so. This is now going to be better for them than had those regulations stayed in place. Is that right?
Yes, I think that's certainly true. And it's just like I was trying to describe, that if you take a critical feature of your business or input to your business, which would be the internet, and you make everybody purchase it the same way, then there's nothing you can do there to compete with the big guys. You have to compete with them completely in the space where they're already the very best and the very biggest. But if you can go to an AT&T or a Verizon or a Cox or a Comcast and say, can you help me out a little bit? I can't customize my network like Google can. I can't customize my network like Facebook can. Those are all got their own networks. Can you sell me some features that kind of helps me out? That's a good thing for you. It can't hurt.
Okay, nice. Well, Mark, this has been great so far. We do have to take a break here, but when we come back from the break, I want to ask you what are some other reasons why we might be happy that the repeal effort has occurred. I know for a lot of people, they're unhappy, and I think that some of it just comes down to the marketing and the branding of the name net neutrality. And so when we come back from the break, we're going to talk more about the pros of the repeal of these regulations. So stick with us through this short break from our sponsors.
You're listening to Veracity Hill, striving for truth on faith, politics, and society.
Evangelical Christians are talking about hell. What if we believe what we believe because we've always believed it? What if the gospel is really a matter of life and death? We want you to open your mind, open your Bible, and rethink hell. At rethinkinghell.com, evangelicals look at what the Bible says about hell, putting conventional and controversial views to the test.
Have you heard of the Google Ad Grant for nonprofits? 501c3 nonprofit organizations can receive $10,000 per month in online advertising credit from Google, empowering you to share your message with the world. At Defenders Media, we partnered with Nonprofit Megaphone, an agency focused solely on Google grant acquisition and management. They got us approved for the grant and now manage ad campaigns, bringing hundreds of new people to our websites each month. If you are eligible, Nonprofit Megaphone will acquire and manage the grant for you for a month for free to see if they can help you too. Visit nonprofitmegaphone.com to learn more.
Hello, I'm David Smith, the Executive Director of Illinois Family Institute, a state-based Christian pro-life and pro-family public policy organization. I want to invite you to join us as we seek to be salt and light to a dark and rapidly decaying culture. You can do that in a number of ways. For example, you can join our email list to get timely alerts and great cultural commentaries. You can like our Facebook page, follow us on Twitter, listen to our podcasts, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. You can attend one or more of the special events and forums we host in different parts of the state. We do all these things to encourage and equip Christians in Illinois. You see, we need you to help us fulfill our mission to boldly bring a biblical perspective to public policy. Our faith requires us to be bold, speak truthfully, and love our neighbors. Join us. Visit IllinoisFamily.org to learn more.
All right, thanks for sticking with us through that short break from our sponsors. If you'd like to learn more about how you could become a sponsor, just go to our website, veracityhill.com/patron. And then you can, there are a couple ways you can support us by being a sponsor. You can become a regular advertising sponsor, just get your logo on our website, or you can also have your ad played during the program, so you can check that out as well. And if, of course, you've got questions about how to support us in that way, you can just email me, Kurt@veracityhill.com. So I'm here today talking with Dr. Mark Jamison. He is the Director and Gunter Professor of the Public Utility Research Center at the University of Florida's Warrington College of Business, and he's a visiting scholar at the American Enterprise Institute. So, Mark, before we took the break there, you helped lay it out for us what net neutrality was, the background behind it, and a little bit of explaining what it is exactly, because I think for a lot of people, they're just unfamiliar with that. And before we jump back into the discussion and talk about those, the further benefits to repealing these efforts, we do a short segment on the show here called Rapid Questions. And these are fun, goofy questions that we ask our first-time guests. And so it is totally unrelated to today's topic. And so I like to try to catch our guests off guard with this. So if you are ready, we've got a minute, and you'll just answer some fun questions, if that's okay with you.
No, it's okay, but I may not be able to answer, so fire away.
Okay, all right. We're going to start the game clock here, and upon that, you'll hear my first question. What is your clothing store of choice?
JCPenney.
Taco Bell or KFC?
Neither one.
What school did you go to?
Well, most recently, the University of Florida. Also went to Kansas State University.
Okay. What's your favorite sport?
Football.
What is your spouse's favorite holiday?
She likes all holidays.
What's your most hated sports franchise?
I guess I don't have one, actually.
Okay. Do you drink Dr. Pepper?
Yes, I do.
Amen to that. Have you ever driven on the other side of the road?
Of course.
Okay. What's the one thing you'd keep with you if you were stranded on an island?
A book.
Okay. The Hokey Pokey, Electric Slide, or the Macarena?
I don't dance very well. Things would get ugly if I had to do that.
Okay, last question. If you were a baseball pitch, which one would you be?
Oh, probably a knuckleball.
A knuckleball. Nice. Great. Well, thanks for playing that round of rapid questions. All right. So what initially got me interested in bringing you on the show was an article that I saw published here by the American Enterprise Institute. And what really even got me interested is that I've seen so much of the barrage against the repeal efforts of net neutrality here. But here, your article was talking about why the repeal effort would be a good thing. And so you've got this list here of 5 reasons why we should be thankful for the repeal efforts. And I want to just pick your brain out on these 5 points here. So the first one you have, the first reason you have is that the repealing of these regulations will bring about more of the innovations that you, or you mean consumers, want. So could you explain what you mean there, that there's going to be further innovations? Yeah.
And so there are 2 things, and I was alluding to some of these earlier. One is that it takes the shackles off of internet service providers so they can be something besides just kind of a pipe that things flow through. They can do enhancements, they can offer new things, And that's just by definition more innovation. And then in doing that, they can also enable persons like yourself, entrepreneurs, to be able to enhance their businesses. So you can, as I was talking about before, maybe get some additional security features on your networks, or maybe be able to move your content through when there's a lot of emails and they would slow you down. You say, oh, put me in front of those emails, and so that your videos can actually get through smoothly. So it enables people like you to do creative things on the internet.
And I was watching a video, and I'm, to be honest, I'm not sure who the gentleman was that was being interviewed, but he was explaining that that in the future there's going to be more money that's invested into the networks that are created. So right now we have 4G speed, or the fourth generation, and that by repealing the regulations, that will allow us to more quickly get to 5G speeds. Is that right?
That's probably true. The companies are pushing pretty hard to deploy the 5G technologies. That's going to change our wireless telecommunications considerably. The profitability of doing that will be up. It will be higher because of the repeal of these rules, so the investments will flow faster.
Okay. So your second reason, and maybe that even led here, so you said more of the network investment that we would want. So what does that mean, network investment? Does that mean the greater speeds and greater range for areas that may not have even 4G speeds right now?
All the above.
Yeah.
Investing in the network empowers a lot of things. It allows it to reach people that it's not reaching now. It increases the capacity of the network so the speeds could be better and be less congestion. It also allows for new technologies, and that's what the fifth generation wireless is all about, a whole different kind of technology, if you will, so that we can carry a lot more videos better. And we can have what's called the Internet of Things, all the machines talking with each other, trading information.
Yeah.
And so that's what we're talking about. Once you allow people new opportunities, they're much more likely to make those investments.
So those new opportunities, that's a great segue here. I think, if I'm understanding your 5 reasons here. The third one you state here is more of the competition that we would want. What does that mean? And specifically, how does the repeal bring about competition that wouldn't have otherwise happened?
Yeah. Well, suppose that when you were trying to decide who to have as your wireless provider. Now, maybe you use T-Mobile, Sprint, AT&T, Verizon, or some of the other smaller types. If they all had to look exactly the same, you wouldn't care very much who you bought from. So everybody would be offering exactly the same thing. That means their prices would become exactly the same. And for a lot of companies, that would just put them out of business. When you allow companies to be different from each other, when you allow them to say, you know, I'm really going to be good for this type of customer, or I'm going to be really good for that type of customer, that allows the market to be bigger because you've increased the value for different types of customers, and then more companies can be profitable, so more companies survive, and you have more competition.
So with the regulations that were in place, would that have benefited the bigger companies and prohibited the smaller companies from trying to compete against those big companies?
Down the road, I think that would have happened. Now, but that's talking about benefiting them relative to their rivals. If everybody looks the same, then only a few are going to survive in that case. Now, the regulations did harm the larger companies as well because it kept them from being able to grow their businesses in other directions. But that particular feature, can you be different from someone else? Exactly, that the larger ones are probably, that's more beneficial to them than the smaller ones.
I could think this instance reminds me of a time when we had the internet tax that was being discussed, and it was surprising. I thought that Amazon came out in support of the internet tax, and you'd think, well, why would a company like Amazon want to support a instance in which their customers are going to be charged more money? And it dawned on me, because Amazon, even though it hurts them a little bit, it hurts the smaller businesses even more because of their profit margins. So in this case with the big internet companies, even though it hurts them a little bit, they'll be able to weather the storm and other companies wouldn't. And so that creates an unfair competition because other companies are more apt to survive. And so that, as someone who likes the free market, I think that the regulations here really cause an unfair marketplace. And so is that an apt analogy to this situation?
I think so. And actually, some of my very first research on this topic, which was a number of years ago, in my analysis, and it's an economics paper, so it's lots of mathematical analysis, it basically showed that net neutrality type rules protect Google and the other large companies from competition. And I talked with Google about that, and they said, yeah, we saw that you said that. They didn't agree or disagree with me on it, but it really did benefit them. And I think that's one of the reasons why they were pushing this, is that they knew that it was going to keep some of the small competitors out because it restricts them from getting any kind of a leg up. If you're going to compete against the big guys, you've got to be different. You've got to have something that sets you apart. And net neutrality made that more difficult.
All right, your fourth reason here, that the repealing of the regulations would lead to more of the transparency that we as consumers would want. What do you mean by transparency here?
Well, I don't know how many people in your audience know who the Federal Communications Commission is. It's generally these regulatory agencies are very obscure to the typical person. But we give these agencies a tremendous amount of power and authority. So the question is, how do we regulate the regulator? If it is invisible to us and has great amount of authority, how do we know it's not abusing that authority? Well, one of the things we instituted in the U.S., and now it's spreading all over the world, is this idea of transparency. Transparency means that you can sit and watch the regulator do his or her work. The regulator has to tell you everyone that it talks with. It has to tell you, here are the issues I'm looking at, here's the data I'm using, here are the people I'm getting information from, and when they make a decision, they say, all right, here's the question I was trying to address, here's the information I had, here's the decision I made, and here's how that all ties together. In this case, what had been happening actually for a long time at the FCC and was very overt in the 2015 order was that the FCC was doing a lot of things behind closed doors. So in most of the discussions about what would the FCC do back in 2014, 2015, actually it's 2014, the discussion was about how would the FCC do a light-handed regulation, which is what it had always been before. Then suddenly, about a month before the vote was to occur, the FCC's chairman started giving talks about how, no, we're going to do what's called Title II, but telephone regulation. There had been no warning. There was no discussion of it. It just suddenly came up for a vote, and the item that was being voted on, no one had seen except the 5 FCC commissioners. No one in the public had ever seen this. Ajit Pai, the new FCC commissioner, said, I don't like that. When I'm going to vote on something, I want the public to see it. I want them to read everything that we're dealing with. And so that is what he has done. So this greater transparency is this greater opportunity to know exactly what the FCC is deciding, the information it's using, and how it's using that information.
And maybe he's maybe just for a little bit regretting all that because now he's just under all this pressure and flack for his decision.
Well, I know Ajit Pai a little bit. I don't know him real well. We're both Kansans, so that makes me feel good.
Okay.
But I know that he knew the kind of heat he was going to be taking. Yeah. And he knew how hard it would be to be transparent. But he's very committed to that. That's something early on in his career that he decided this is really important. Government must be done in the full view of the public. And so no matter how hard that is, he's very committed to that principle.
All right, so the fifth and final reason that you gave here in this article that caught my attention, that we as consumers would have more sound economic reasoning. What did you mean by that?
All right, so it's interesting when you look at that 2015 decision, how little economic analysis there is in it, and how much of the economic analysis is wrong. And this actually became a joke on the internet. So the FCC, when it was going through all this work, had a gentleman named Tim Brennan as their chief economist. I know Tim very well. He's a professor at the University of Maryland. Sharp, very, very candid guy. A few months after the decision came out, he was speaking at a program, and he called it an economics-free zone. He said that order was an economics-free zone. He said there are two reasons for it. He said that one is none of the economists were allowed any input into the work that was done. He said about 6 weeks or so before the vote was to happen, suddenly people quit talking to the economists. We were not allowed to know what was going on. Then he also said, when I look at the economics that's actually in there, it's wrong. Another former chief economist, Michael Katz, he was a chief economist many years before. He also gave a talk at that conference. And he said he found it very funny looking at the FCC's decision because it cited some of his research papers. He's an economist at the University of California, Berkeley. He said they cited my papers, but they cited them wrong. They said my paper said something it didn't actually say. He said they would cite my paper as being evidence that we should have this kind of regulation, and my paper was actually about a different topic. And so that was just very poor economics. One of the things that Chairman Pai committed to is that they will do better economic analysis. And as you look at how they proceeded through this proceeding, you could see it there. There were economists having input, and the analysis actually mattered.
Well, that's good. It's good to have, a number of the points that you made here. You want transparency. You want good competition between businesses because that, as we see, especially the best field that I like to illustrate this with for people, how competition is good, is cell phone development. You've got the companies creating better, faster cell phones with different features, and so it's because of that competition that we as consumers get a better product. And then also the sound economic reasoning, the idea that there's an economic free zone, that just doesn't make sense. Economics has a way of finding itself into many areas in our lives.
Well, the FCC is what we call an economic regulator. Their job is to regulate the economics of an industry. So it kind of makes sense that they use some economic analysis.
Yeah. All right, we've got a comment here from David. And so he wrote that net neutrality helped curb things that internet service providers were doing. And they were even getting sued over. And so that by having these net neutrality regulations, this helped to stop wasting taxpayer dollars in fighting these corporations, say for false advertising. I think here he might have in mind the throttling speeds. What would you say to David here, who seems to have supported net neutrality?
Okay, so you don't need telephone-type regulations to address that issue. If someone is falsely advertised, they're saying, we never slow down your traffic, but then they really do. That's a consumer protection. I'm not a lawyer, but I would call that fraud. We have the Federal Trade Commission that deals with that in any industry. They could deal with that here as well. So yes, telling customers they're buying one thing, that they really are getting something else, that should never be allowed. But we already have laws that take care of that.
Yeah, there are already laws that take care of false advertising, and then those problems, it seems, can also be solved through the court system. And so by having that happen, the companies wouldn't want to go to court, because they're going to lose the court cases. It's going to end up worse for them. And so it seems like even in the legal structure that already exists, there's a market preventative from having them do that. So,
right. And you don't have to go through the courts. You have consumer protection agencies in states.
Okay.
And if it's false advertising, they have authority there. Then, like I said, we have a Federal Trade Commission at the federal government. That's also their space.
So in this case, what you'd say to David as well, it seems that net neutrality regulations were still nevertheless unnecessary for solving that problem.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. Last question here we've got is from Joe, who asks, how will the net neutrality repeal affect Bitcoin? So is there any relationship there between net neutrality and, say, cryptocurrencies?
Well, it's going to be very indirect. So what you see with the cryptocurrencies is they're being used a lot to fund startup companies.
Okay.
So rather than try to go out to an angel investor or go to a venture capitalist, and there are only a few of those in some of the spaces, so it's not always easy to get the funding. You can issue a cryptocurrency. Now, that has a lot of hazards to it, but it's an opportunity. So if there are more business opportunities for entrepreneurs in the internet space, and they issue cryptocurrencies, then you get more cryptocurrencies issued, which is good in a way for Bitcoin, because Bitcoin kind of bridges between a lot of those cryptocurrencies.
Okay.
On the other hand, they also compete with Bitcoin. So one of those two forces will win out. Right now, they're pushing against each other.
Yeah. So there's competition even in the cryptocurrency market.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, and I know Bitcoin's been on a craze. I mean, it's up in the high teens per coin, 17 or 18,000. It's if I had invested in Bitcoin when I was in college, oh boy.
That's one of the big challenges with Bitcoin is people are treating it like an investment. But if it's really just a currency, there's no investment value there at all. You're just gambling on its kind of supply and demand and how that's going to play out.
Yeah. I know that a lot of people thinking that it's a bubble, and sometimes with bubbles, you never quite know when it's going to pop. So even if it stays this way for a long time, it still might be a bubble.
It could be. Yeah, I've got a brilliant graduate student that's working on this. We're trying to sort out what's really going on here.
Okay, interesting, fascinating. Well, we'll have to, keep us posted on that research. That'd be great. Now, before I let you go, I do want to ask you this. So you were on the FCC transition team for President-elect Trump. So tell me, what was that like, and what were your duties in being appointed to that post?
Well, that was probably the most fascinating moment, 2 months or whatever in my career. You think about a transition team, what it's for. The federal government, I may get the numbers a little bit wrong, but I think it has like 3 million employees. And that doesn't count all the contractors. That's just the employees.
Oh, wow.
The budget is $4 trillion. If you're elected president of the United States, you have 6 weeks to take over an enterprise that is that huge.
Yeah.
And that is not easy to do. So what we do, and I don't know how long this has been done, is the outgoing administration designates people who will work with what's called the transition team for the incoming administration. And for the most part, we're all volunteers, at least those of us for the incoming. And our job is basically to take whatever kinds of policies and plans the incoming administration has, talk with the government agencies that are in place, and see how that might be done. So we're really kind of at that point a communication vehicle. Now, before the election, there's a transition team in place as well. That one's always kept secret. Well, it was kept secret this time. That laid out what those policies would be. My work that's public was what they called the landing team, which was that interface. The great lesson for me in all of that is to see how politics works. So I'm an economist. I actually teach people around the world how to do this kind of work of regulating utilities and how to think about this complex political environment that they're in. One thing that I really enjoyed seeing was on my view of politics, how it really works. I was right. That was amazing to see. Sometimes us academics aren't right.
Nice. So that's great. It sounds like you had a wonderful opportunity there to serve in that capacity. As you said, sort of almost a career highlight, if you will, for you. And well, again, like I said, we'll have to bring you back on the show because I'll be interested to know more about the cryptocurrencies. Maybe we'll have a show just on that. We haven't done that yet, so it'd be interesting to learn more about that and the pros and cons there. So.
Yeah, it's a fascinating topic. A former student of mine is in Silicon Valley, and that's his area of work. So I've learned a lot from him.
Okay, nice. Well, Dr. Mark Jamison, thank you so much for joining us on the show today.
My pleasure.
All right, so we'll go ahead and put the article that caught my attention. We'll put that on the website, and we also will put the link there so you can learn more about Dr. Jamison and the work that he has done. And now, before we end, I love to play this little tune. All right, that's the mailbag sound. We've got one comment here from someone who wrote in on last week's episode. This is from Steve Pankratz. He said, just as an FYI, first you may see this as minutia, but this is one of the most overused false stats I have seen out there. And here he is referring to last week. Dr. Jim Payton was talking about the number of denominations that exist out there in the world. And that number that's often cited is the 33,000. And what we've got here is not so much an issue of all these denominations because there are independent churches, and there are something like 22,000 independent churches. So, Steve, thank you for citing that statistic because I agree with you, but I had agreed insofar as I didn't want to take the discussion off track too much with Dr. Payton last week. And so, but you're right. There are a number of independent churches that some people are counting as denominations, and that's not quite right. Rather, there are about 9,000 Protestant denominations. But I think Dr. Payton's point remains. There are still too many denominations out there. And sadly, when anybody can start their own church, it means that there's division within Christ followers. And so that's a thing to be concerned about. So you're right. It is a point of minutia, but nevertheless, I think Dr. Payton's point remains. So thank you so much for commenting on the live stream there from last week. And I hope that you've also tuned into this week. So. Okay, well, that does it for the show today. I'm grateful for the continued support of our patrons and the sponsorships that we have with our sponsors, Defenders Media, Consult Kevin, The Sky Floor, Rethinking Hell, the Illinois Family Institute, Evolution 2.0, Fox Restoration, and Nonprofit Megaphone. Thank you to the tech producer today, Joel, for coming in and running the soundboard. And lastly, I want to say one final thank you to our guest, Dr. Mark Jamison. And last but not least, I want to thank you for listening in and for striving for truth on faith, politics, and society.
You've been listening to Veracity Hill, striving for truth on faith, politics, and society. This is a listener-supported program. For more resources, including past shows, visit veracityhill.com.